BBC News at 10 o'clock with Clive, Myrie.
Tonight at 10, Nadhim Zahawi is sacked as Conservative Party chairman over the controversy surrounding his tax affairs. An inquiry finds he failed to disclose he was being investigated by the tax authorities.
The Prime Minister read the findings of a report into Nadhim Zahawi first thing this morning. His party chairman was sacked within an hour or so. But should he have been fired a week ago?
Also on the programme, the government minister responsible for housing says building safety guidelines were ambiguous in the run-up to the Grenfell fire disaster almost 6 years ago. In Ukraine, a family mourns a hidden hero of the war with Russia. And a blockbuster match in the FA Cup fourth round for non-league Wrexham and their Hollywood owner. Good evening. The Conservative Party chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, has been sacked from the cabinet by the Prime Minister following several days of uncertainty about his future. After an investigation ordered by Number 10, Rishi Sunak's ethics advisor has found Mr Zahawi failed to disclose full details of a tax dispute, and this breached the ministerial code of conduct. Mr Zahawi admitted paying a settlement to the tax authority, HMRC, including a penalty, but failed to declare the information. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has the full story.
Nadhim Zahawi arrived in the UK as a child, unable to speak English. He became a multimillionaire and rose to be Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Just at the top of the steps, please, Chancellor.
But tonight, his political career and reputation is in tatters. In a 2,000-word letter to the Prime Minister, the government's ethics advisor is devastating in his criticism of Mr Zahawi. Sir Laurie Magnus says, "I consider that Mr Zahawi has shown insufficient regard to be honest, open and an exemplary leader through his own behaviour."
The chairman of the Conservative Party.
Minutes after the Prime Minister had sacked his party chairman for what he called a serious breach of the ministerial code, the questions began. For a start, why hadn't he got rid of him days ago?
As a general rule, I think it is important when allegations are raised that they're investigated promptly, but also we shouldn't rush to judgment before there's been that investigation.
The Prime Minister's ethics advisor highlights 7 occasions when Nadhim Zahawi breached the ministerial code, albeit some for the same mistake. A failure to declare the tax authority were investigating him while he was COVID vaccine minister, making the same error when he became Education Secretary for England in September 2021, and repeating it a third time when he became Chancellor in July last year. A failure to declare he'd paid a penalty to Revenue and Customs in September last year. A failure to tell the then Prime Minister Liz Truss about this when she appointed him to government, and a failure to tell Rishi Sunak when he took the top job.
What was your reaction when you...
Plus, there was this last July, which Sir Laurie says was untrue.
So I was clearly being smeared. I was being told that the Serious Fraud Office, that the National Crime Agency, that HMRC are looking into me. I'm not aware of this.
But there was an investigation by the tax authority. Mr Zahawi has maintained he didn't think it amounted to an investigation. The opposition parties say all this reflects badly on the Prime Minister.
This is very serious, and Nadhim Zahawi has spent a very long time dodging this. And I do just think it speaks to Rishi Sunak's character and his judgment and his weakness.
Nadhim Zahawi should either have been sacked or at least have stepped aside until the inquiry took place, instead of which he was allowed to stay in government while there were these serious questions.
On a day of letters, a final one, Nadhim Zahawi wrote to the Prime Minister, saying he took pride in having been in government, including his role in the rollout of the COVID vaccine. But he made no mention whatsoever of any of the criticisms levelled at him. The focus now returns to the Prime Minister and questions about his judgment.
That's the big thing, isn't it, Chris? Where does all this leave the Prime Minister?
That is the big question, Clive, because inevitably on a day like this there is a focus on someone like Mr Zahawi, but inevitably it ricochets very quickly to a question about the Prime Minister. Now, what Rishi Sunak is attempting to do is say, look, I define integrity by doing things by the book, by following the rules, by seeking the facts. And to an extent, I think that also speaks to his character. But as well, it's about his political position. The fifth Prime Minister after a long stint of the Conservatives in office, poll ratings for them which are dire, and restive backbenchers. So operating cautiously, sometimes quite defensively. Plus, there's a pattern of behaviour here with his appointment. So the resignation of an ally, Gavin Williamson, over allegations of bullying. Sir Gavin said he refuted them. The appointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, another ally who'd backed him for the leadership just a week after she'd resigned. Yes, for breaching the ministerial code, albeit under a different Prime Minister. And the ongoing inquiry, led by a senior lawyer, into the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. Again, allegations of bullying, which he denied. So we're seeing this pattern where Rishi Sunak so often faces questions about the people he's appointed, and it looks quite likely he'll face them again in the future.
Sure. OK, Chris, thank you. Chris Mason, our political editor. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with murder after the death of a 15-year-old girl in Northumberland. Holly Newton was fatally stabbed on Friday in the town of Hexham. Peter Harris has that story.
Described by her school as quiet, conscientious and kind, this is 15-year-old Holly Newton. The schoolgirl died after being stabbed in the Northumberland market town of Hexham.
I'm really shocked. It's really sad what's happened, so it's just such a shame, such a waste.
Yes, dreadful for everybody and for all the families and friends.
A 16-year-old boy was also stabbed in the incident on Friday afternoon. He remains in a stable condition in hospital.
It's a tight-knit community. It's the one that looks after its own. It's a very loving community. To have this happen on our doorstep is just such a huge shock, and the whole community is in shock.
The families of the teenagers involved in this tragedy are being supported by specialist police officers. Meanwhile, a 16-year-old boy has been charged with murder, attempted murder and possession of an offensive weapon. He's due to appear before magistrates in Newcastle in the morning. Peter Harris, BBC News, Hexham.
The Housing and Community Secretary, Michael Gove, has admitted a collective failure of government contributed to lax building safety guidelines in the run-up to the Grenfell Tower fire. He says developers now have 6 weeks to sign contracts to fix problems in their buildings or face being banned from constructing any new developments. Hundreds of thousands of flats across Britain still have flammable cladding or other fire safety issues 6 years after the Grenfell disaster, which claimed 72 lives. Here's Tom Simons.
Why did it happen? Lots of reasons. In 2021, the government said it was deeply sorry for failing to regulate fire safety in the construction of tall buildings. But its barrister told the Grenfell Public Inquiry if government guidance had been followed,
a large-scale cladding fire could not have happened.
One of the things the guidance said was that some materials on tall buildings should be able to withstand fire, like the insulation, these charred sections. But it didn't specifically say that cladding shouldn't be used, these grey and highly flammable panels. They were used all over England and Wales and on Grenfell. Today, for the first time, Michael Gove accepted that that government guidance was, quotes, faulty and ambiguous.
It was collective over many years, involving people from different parties.
It's a failure of government.
Yeah, totally. And it was a failure to effectively have a system of building regulations which could keep people safe.
Result, hundreds of buildings with dangerous materials, huge bills to make them safe, including £5 billion of taxpayers' money. But now the government is giving developers 6 weeks to accept legal responsibility for the work.
Tomorrow, I'll be publishing a contract which will say to the developers concerned, people who, put up buildings which are unsafe, look, you now have, as you said you will, an opportunity to put that right to make them safe.
And if they don't sign, a threat. The government says the big developers of major complexes like this one in South London won't be able to get their projects signed off. effectively kicking them out of the market in England. The response of flat owners:
I really do hope that Michael Gove forces developers to sign this, and this isn't just kind of empty words as we've seen in the past.
But developers believe they are convenient targets for a government desperate to show it's tackling the building safety crisis.
The reason he's going after UK house builders is because they're domiciled in the UK, they pay taxes here, and they're easier to engage with. And we have argued for the past 5 years or longer that product manufacturers also need to pay their fair share.
Perhaps one product manufacturer in particular, the French firm Arconic, which manufactured the cladding which spread the Grenfell fire. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories now. And more than 50 people have died in 2 separate accidents in Pakistan. At least 41 were killed in the southwestern city of Bella after a bus plunged off a bridge. The vehicle reportedly hit a pillar before bursting into flames. Elsewhere, 10 children drowned when a boat capsized on a lake close to the northwestern city of Kohat. The Scottish Justice Secretary says there will be a pause on transgender prisoners with a history of violence against women being placed in female jails. It follows the public outcry after a trans woman, Isla Bryson, who was convicted of raping 2 women before changing gender, was initially remanded to a women's prison before being moved to a men's jail. The chief executive of the Welsh Rugby Union, Steve Phillips, has resigned. It comes after a BBC Wales Investigates programme raised allegations of misogyny, sexism and racism in Welsh Rugby's governing body. WRU's performance director, Nigel Walker, will take over as acting CEO with immediate effect. And Dame Esther Ranson has revealed she's been diagnosed with lung cancer, but says she feels optimistic. In a statement, the 82-year-old broadcaster and charity founder said she'd been given the diagnosis in the last few weeks and is now having tests to assess the best treatment. While Ukraine waits for the delivery of tanks from the West, which it hopes will help change the course of the war with Russia, heavy fighting continues in the east with mounting casualties. One of the grim tasks of the conflict is body collection, with Ukraine establishing a team dedicated to retrieving dead civilians and soldiers. It's necessary but highly dangerous work, as our correspondent Andrew Harding now reports from the town of Sloviansk.
Fresh snow and a funeral in the Donbass this morning. This time for a man who was not quite a soldier and not quite a civilian either. 21-year-old Denis Sosnenko was a body collector. His mother is led towards his open coffin. Last year we met Denis, standing in the background here. He was with his team of volunteers close to the front lines. A grim and dangerous job scouring Ukraine's battlefields for abandoned bodies, Ukrainian and Russian soldiers alike. And now he's being buried, a few days after driving over an anti-tank mine. He always told us, I have to do this work. If not me, then who? Says his mother, Ludmila. Last October, another BBC team caught up with Denis, collecting more Russian bodies, after checking they weren't booby-trapped, as they often are. Denis spoke then of the horrors of the work, of picking the dead up limb by limb. But today his teammates talk of his dedication.
He did so much with his short life. He brought back so many dead people. And we must carry on with that work, because there are families still waiting for the dead to come home.
So many of those unclaimed bodies are here in the northern Donbass, a blasted landscape littered with Russian corpses. But the Kremlin's forces are learning from their mistakes and slowly seizing more ground.
Russia are learning every day, and they change their strategy, and it's very hard for us, and I think we need to learn faster. Then Russian, yeah.
In the meantime, Denis's coffin is brought to his hometown cemetery. The mood here, and indeed across Ukraine, is one not just of grief, but of exhaustion. The fear that this long war has barely even begun, and that the work of body collectors like Denis will be needed here for months, if not for years to come. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Ukraine.
This week marks 3 years since the UK's official departure from the EU in January 2020. Since then, we've regularly visited the town of Stratford-upon-Avon, where 52% voted leave and 48% voted remain, mirroring the national result. As the third anniversary approaches, our political correspondent Alex Forsyth returned this month to the town to gauge how people now feel about Brexit.
Brexit! It was a day of celebration for some, sorrow for others. In Stratford-upon-Avon, pro-EU activists gathered to mark the moment we left the EU. 3 years on, we returned with them to the same spot.
Brexit has made this country a lot poorer, people a lot more divided, and but no one wants to talk about it anymore.
Here, like in many places, the debate has undoubtedly quietened, though not disappeared. And these friends have just realised they've been on different sides throughout.
I still think it was the right thing to do. A lot of people thought it was instantly going to produce big change to the country, but it'll take time. I believe in this country.
I voted for leave, yeah.
And are you still sure now about the vote that you made then?
At the moment, yeah. There's been a change of parliament, change of government. We'll just wait and see, really.
And how about you guys? Your friends, same friendship group, different view?
I still think we should have remained. I think we've made a big mistake. We've alienated ourselves from our neighbours.
If there was another chance to do it again or go back in, would you want to?
We respect the vote, and that's where we need to stay. Going back in now isn't an option.
So some things they do agree on.
With what he's just said, we're still friends.
Brexit dominated and divided politics and much of our national conversation for years. But soon after we actually left the European Union, the COVID pandemic swept the globe with all the economic, social and political turmoil that followed. Now, 3 years on, with some aspects of Brexit still unresolved, some are still trying to understand what its true impact has been. At Stratford Bridge Club, some are waiting to see how things unfold, but others have already changed their minds.
I'm embarrassed to say I voted for Brexit. We were obviously lied to so much, and I just feel a fool.
A fool?
Absolutely a fool. All the people who've had to leave the country, and then you've got the lorries on the motorways. I mean, there's just so many things.
I'm finding it difficult to keep quiet. I disagree totally with everything Judy has said. I don't believe we were lied to.
A long-term Conservative supporter, Richard says the government hasn't delivered. Do you feel like you got what you voted for with
Absolutely
Brexit?
not. I mean, we were promised a bonfire of EU laws. We were promised that we'd have our own UK Bill of Rights. If these things had happened, then I think the country would be in a totally different but better position.
So years after the votes were counted and then the country departed, it seems some of the conversations about Brexit are still playing out. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Stratford-upon-Avon.
Now, with the day's sport, here's Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Ollie.
Many thanks indeed, Clive. Good evening. It's been a relatively upset-free FA Cup weekend. But the holders Liverpool, they're out, beaten by Brighton. And the tie of the fourth round was at the Racecourse Ground, where non-league Wrexham drew 3-3 against Championship side Sheffield United to make it into tomorrow's fifth-round draw. It certainly kept one of the club's co-owners, the Hollywood star Ryan Reynolds, on the edge of his seat. Adam Wilde reports. Big night coming up in NFL. 4 teams, 1 win away from the Super Bowl. 49ers are actually playing the Eagles right now. You can follow that on the BBC Sport website. But that's all the sport for now. Clive.
Ollie, many thanks. Ollie Foster there. Time for the weather. Susan Powell's here. Hi there.
Evening, Clive. A pretty quiet start to our new working week. It looks like we're going to have a lot of dry weather around this Monday, just a light breeze, and our temperatures around average. A big difference to the contrasts we saw across the UK last week. High pressure pushing up from the southwest is what's going to calm things down so nicely for Monday. We've still got this low here, though, towards the northeast, producing some pretty strong winds across Scotland for tonight, and we'll continue to carry some showers in here through the small hours as well. There's a weather front diving away to the south across England and Wales. A bit of light rain and drizzle to come out of that, but nothing really too meaningful. Our sky's clear behind the front, but it doesn't turn toe cold because we've got that wind. Even though it starts to slacken off through Monday, it still stays breezy to the northwest of Scotland. We'll still see a few showers around here, but a lot of fine weather, a lot of sunshine, and our temperatures in the 8 to 10 degree range, so around average for the time of year. Sunshine gets a bit hazy, though, across Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of the day. We start to see this weather front working its way in, and that will herald the arrival of this area of low pressure to the north of the UK for Tuesday. Some wet weather sinking its way south overnight into Tuesday, finally clears the south coast of the UK by the time we get into the latter part of Tuesday morning, I should say. But we're left with some very strong winds across northern Scotland, slamming in frequent showers and making for a chillier feel, just 7 degrees in Aberdeen, down on the 10 that we'll see on Monday. And then we'll need to keep quite a close eye to the far north of Scotland as we head through Tuesday evening. Widespread gales, but the potential for severe gales to the far north of the country, potentially damaging winds. But after that, it looks like actually we'll see things calming down a little more again from Wednesday onwards, and through our week as a whole, drier than it has been for certainly many of us in the earlier parts of January as we go into the early part of February. Lighter winds and around average temperatures. So a fairly decent picture for the start of the new month, Clive.
OK, not bad. Susan, thank you. Susan Powell. That's it. But the news continues, of course, here on BBC One as we join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Have a very good night.